We're here again with David Wright, employment law expert, on our series on the top things that come up about employment law. And one of them is self-employment. What constitutes self-employment and what is and what isn't? And I know there's been a few trip-ups where there's been tribunals as well, big cases. So if you could tell us a little bit about what constitutes self-employment and what doesn't, that would be great.
Right, it's a bit of a long roundabout answer. Because the difficulty is that legally there isn't a definition of what's an employee and what's self-employed, but there are sort of indicators. So probably the first thing to do is to say, why do people think self-employment's attractive as an employer? And those are easy, the attractions are dead clear. You don't pay tax, you don't pay employers' national insurance, you don't pay holiday pay, you don't pay sick pay, you don't pay maternity pay. So, big financial attractions to be self-employed. The downside is that you can't have your cake and eat it. So if someone is self-employed, they're running their own business within your business. So there are really two models. One model is where somebody will simply charge somebody a flat rent to use a room. So a therapist will say, I'm doing electrolysis in room number 6 and I'm going to give you £200 a day. And you simply collect the £200 a day, we give them a written agreement, it runs for a year because you don't have people there permanently unless you want to, and they pay their rent, but they're free to set their own charges, they use their own products, they provide their materials, they keep the money, they issue receipts. Absolutely no doubt that is self-employment.
And can the salon book their appointments under that, or would they have to book their own appointments?
Well, in the ideal world, on the checklist, that's one of the things which you'd look at and say, why would you book the appointments for somebody who's running their own business? Now, what happens is there's a Hmrc checklist, and we say, here are 7 or 8 items, and if you can say yes to all of these, you're an employee, and if you say no to all of these, you're self-employed. But it doesn't actually say how many of them you have to say yes or no to. So, for example, if I'm self-employed, I don't have to do the work myself, I can send a deputy. So let's think of an example. If you book a window cleaner, you're not booking that person to clean your windows, they may send their brother because they're self-employed. So if they're self-employed and you put in the contract, you're free to use a deputy with my prior approval, well, that looks like self-employment. If you say you've got to do the work yourself, well, then that ticks one of the negative boxes. So there's quite a long list of those. And the biggest one of all, which people forget about, is if I'm self-employed, the clients are mine. So restrictive covenants, you might try, but aren't really enforceable. So if I move next door at the end of my 1-year agreement, I can take the clients, I've got their details because they're my clients. So that's the threat.
I know there has been a big case, hasn't there, with
Uber taxis.
Where they fell foul of what was self-employed and...
That's right. Well, I think that let me just go back one step. There's a temptation not to charge a flat rent, because if I've got my electrolysis therapist who's booked morning till night 7 days a week, I probably want a share of that money. Well, one way of getting a share of that money is employ her, then it's all your money. But the other is to say, we'll split the takings 40-60. But once you get into the 40-60, you start to tick more of the boxes that they're really an employee. For example...
That happens a lot, doesn't it?
It happens lots of times. Very topical. And I'd always say to the clients, well, here's a few issues. Number one, how do you know what they've taken unless you take the money? And then they're self-employed, why are you taking their money? Why are you telling them what to charge? If they decide to take 4 weeks off because the sun's shining, 40% of nothing is nothing. So the more you go down the percentage route, the less clear it is that you're self-employed. But the Uber taxi case was in all the national papers, it was national news, it's going to appeal, so it'll be in national news again. And this was a couple of the taxi drivers who claimed the minimum wage and holiday pay. And they won. And they won. I've just got a short sum of them in front of me. These are the things which made the court decide that the taxi drivers were really employees. The passenger booked their ride, booked their journey through the company. We didn't book them through a taxi driver, which is your point earlier. Uber taxis interviewed the people to see if they wanted them to be self-employed with them, but they're not employees. Uber taxis had the name and details of all of the clients, the taxi driver didn't.
Yeah.
Again, all the indication is that's because they're clients. Uber set the route and told the person how they were going to get from A to B. So there's no discretion in how you do your work. If I'm self-employed, how I do my duties is up to me. And if a client's unhappy, they complain to me as a self-employed person. Whereas for Uber taxis, the complaint went to Uber taxis.
Yes.
And finally, the last one was the Uber taxis asked the passengers to rate the performance of the drivers. So you can imagine in your salon, you're worried about your reputation, people start to complain about a self-employed person. Well, you really do have to put your head in your hands and accept it's nothing to do with you, they're self-employed.
Yeah.
You can't go and tell them how to do the job.
Though, when it's in your salon, then clients, it's your name above the door kind of thing, isn't it?
Exactly. But the key thing is, A, have a written agreement. So the more you've got a written agreement, the more it's clear if there's a dispute. But the key thing is go into it with your eyes open. So I've got customers who literally have walked away from the salon and go and collect the rent and have little on to do it, and they get the rent and they say I'm free of all these staff worries and administration, and that's fine. I've got other people who've tried self-employment but they can't let go, and that's usually the issue, that they can't let go and we're not happy about standards, and they're concerned that people might not be issuing the right receipts or taking the money themselves, and that people go home early. If I'm self-employed at 2 o'clock and I've got no clients, I'll go home.
Yeah.
Well, I might be the only person in the salon, but once you say to me you must stay till 5 o'clock, it casts a doubt. Now, the two things that happen is, first of all, Hmrc decide to inspect you because they lose lots and lots of revenue, and they particularly focus on hair and beauty. The second thing is, like Uber taxis, someone falls out with you or becomes pregnant or decides they want to get holiday pay, and they say, I'm really an employee, this is all bogus. And if you're not prepared for that, you haven't got a leg to stand on. So it's about thinking about it before you start and having a written agreement.
Excellent. The other thing that I get asked a lot about is, and an issue is that a salon's doing lots of training with an employee and then they decide to leave and set themselves up and take the clients. Can you actually do anything about that?
Yeah, it's they're called restrictive covenants, and people tell me all sorts of stories. Now, the radius clause to say where you can set up your business has to be tiny. You're really talking half a mile maximum, because you're able to protect your high street. But my view is it's less about where the person goes to work and much more about them not taking the clients. So normally my agreement will say you won't open a business within half a mile radius, and you won't contact or accept bookings from any clients who've attended the salon in the previous 12 months. Now, that's the bit where you can take action, because it's very easy to check if all the clients have suddenly disappeared. Some clients remain loyal and tell you they've been contacted, and you go through the small claims court and can claim up to £10,000. There are no legal fees, there's an admin fee of about £200, and we've probably had half a dozen of those every year over the last 5 years. And
can you stop that person trading then, or if you win your case, or does that...
The stopping them trading is tremendously difficult, because you have to go to the High Court. So in theory you could, but realistically what I'd say, it's just a practical point, if somebody's opened a new business a mile away and not taken any of your clients whatsoever, well, that's not a lot different from somebody opening a new business who didn't work for you. It's really about the poaching of the clients. Otherwise it's seen as competition.
Fantastic. Thank you once again, David.
Okay, my pleasure.